lesson for today is taken from the book of Jeremiah. Thus says the Lord, sing aloud with gladness for Jacob, and raise shouts for the chief of the nations. Proclaim, give praise, and say, save, O Lord, your people, the remnant of Israel. See, I'm going to bring them from the land of the north and gather them from the farthest parts of the earth. Among them the blind and the lame, those with child and those in labor, together a great company. They shall return here. With weeping they shall come, and with consolations I will lead them back. I will let them walk by brooks of water in the straight path in which they shall not stumble. For I have become a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Today's psalm is taken from Psalms 126, to be read responsibly at the half verse. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, then was our mouth filled with laughter,
and our tongue with shouts of joy.
Then they said among the nations,
The Lord has done great things for them,
the Lord has done great things for us.
and we are glad indeed.
Restore our fortunes, O Lord.
Like the watercourses of the air,
Those who sow with tears,
we will weep with songs of joy.
those who go out weeping, carrying the seed,
We will come again with joy, children of their sheaves.
Furthermore, the former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able for all time to save those who approach God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For it was fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, blameless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. Unlike all other priests, he has no need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for those of the people. For this he did once for all, and when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests those who are subject to weakness. But the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Continuation of the Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus and his disciples came to Jericho. And he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stood still and said, call him here. And they called to the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up, he's calling you. So, throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to Jesus, my teacher, let me see again. Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. And immediately he regained his sight, and he followed Jesus on the way. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
I wondered there for a moment whether I was preaching. He who reads gospel gets to preach. You're done. It's not surprising that most of the passages that are read for the gospel each Sunday are familiar to us. We've heard them so often, and there's a real temptation to turn off, to not listen to them when they're being read, even by the person who is reading them. And that's very sad. These stories have been told for over 1900 years. They've been read in the course of public worship in English for half a millennium. And if English-speaking clergy and teachers have been doing their jobs properly, ever since the time when King Alfred the Great insisted that preachers and teachers use English for their sermons and for their lessons, then they have been heard by English-speaking children and churchgoers for over 1,500 years. So we know the stories. We've heard them before. But do we always understand the background of the stories? What it is that the evangelist was seeking to get across to his first readers, his first audience, and what it is that the evangelist would be trying to get across to us if he were writing today. And let us take this morning's reading for the gospel as a case in point. Now, I hope that everyone could tell me what the gospel was about. Yeah, it was about a blind man, wasn't it? About Bartimaeus, yeah. Even got it on the cover of the program just in case you weren't listening. Oh yes, Jesus healed a blind man. Well, we've heard that before. So what? Well, yes indeed. So what? What is Mark the Evangelist really telling us? Mark's is the shortest gospel in the New Testament. He's very careful in his use of words, and we who are his readers should respect that. It's probably being over-dramatic to suggest that we should hang on his every word, but since his words are important to him, after all, he could have used other words, his words should be important to us as well. Now, I'm not suggesting that we take this passage word by word. That would take too long, and there's a 5 o'clock service this evening. I want Father John to have a chance to preach. But at least let us consider the words maybe phrase by phrase, clause by clause, sentence by sentence. And Mark starts out by telling us that Jesus came to Jericho with his disciples. Notice Mark does not use the word apostles here. It's not just 12 who were with him. Jesus was traveling with a sizable group of his followers, his disciples, possibly men and women. And they come to Jericho. Jericho, a town on the Jordan at the foot of that long climb up to Jerusalem, a town that was accustomed to bands of pilgrims making their way up to the holy city, to the city of David, and especially for so great a feast as the feast of the Passover, which was just around the corner. And then Mark tells us that Jesus and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho. It's no longer just Jesus and his disciples, but a large crowd as well. Obviously something has happened in Jericho, although Mark doesn't tell us exactly what. Had Jesus spoken to the groups of pilgrims that had assembled in Jericho before the dangerous climb through the bandit country to Jerusalem? Had they been impressed by what he said? It's not simply that groups of pilgrims were setting off up the hill to Jerusalem, but a large crowd of them had decided to travel in company with Jesus. Mark is telling us, if only we would listen, that Jesus was not approaching the authorities in Jerusalem in a quiet, almost private manner. He was coming accompanied by a crowd of believers, a crowd of followers. And no wonder the authorities in the city of David were alarmed at his coming. And then Mark introduces a new character. And this character is virtually anonymous. All we know is that he supposedly had a father who was known as Timaeus, or as he's known in other parts of the world, Timaeus. In fact, Mark tells us this twice. He tells us it in Hebrew, Bartimaeus, and then in Greek, Huios Timaeus, which translated into English is the son of Timaeus. Yet, Timaeus doesn't look like a name at all. Nobody else in the Hebrew Scriptures, nobody else in the Greek New Testament has this name. In the version of this story in Luke's Gospel, the blind man is not named at all, nor is he in Matthew's account. And in Matthew, he becomes two blind people, perhaps a man and a woman. And John doesn't have this story at all. It's only in Mark, only in this place. Now, there's a word in Hebrew, timea, and it means utterly defiled, with the overtone or the undertone that the defilement has come about through some deliberate action by the one who is utterly defiled. So this man's name or his nickname might indicate that he'd done something of his own volition that had led to his defilement and so to his ostracism. Mark tells us that he is a blind beggar sitting by the roadside. Whoever he is, whoever he was, whatever he had done, the so-called good people of Jericho had chosen to call him the child of utter defilement. He was blind and he was a beggar. And that's no surprise, since how else was he to find food if he could not do begging? He had to rely on the scraps that wayfarers left behind, the almost inedible scraps that other people chose to throw away, or perhaps they chose to hurl it at him because of his utter defilement and degradation. And he was blind. 1,000 years before the time of Jesus, Jesus' ancestor David had determined to make the city of the Jebusites his capital. This city was set on a hill, and the Jebusites thought it was an impregnable site. They mocked David as he began his assault on their fortress, jeering that they didn't need their regular soldiers to defend their fortress, since even the blind and the lame could defend it successfully against this David and his pseudo-army. As a result, as we read in 2 Samuel 5:8, David declared that once the city and its fortress had fallen to his army, no one, blind or lame, would be permitted into that area. And so it was for the next 1,000 years. No one who was blind, no one who was lame could enter the city of David or the site of the temple. And Bartimaeus was blind, he was defiled, he was degraded. And then he was told that Jesus of Nazareth was there with his disciples and with a great crowd of pilgrims passing by on the road to that very temple in Jerusalem. But there was no way that he could join that crowd. He was blind. He could not go to the temple. There was no way that he could join that crowd. But was there? He'd heard somewhere that Jesus of Nazareth was a descendant of David. Now just suppose that he could ask this descendant of the one who had cast a curse on the blind to revoke that curse. What might happen? And so he cries out. He cries out to Jesus, not as son of Joseph, but as son of David. Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. He'd had no argument with David. Why should he be forced to live under David's curse? Why should he be victimized for what someone of another nation altogether had said in the past, 1,000 years ago? Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And now many in that crowd, that same crowd who had captured something of significance to them in what Jesus had said, now told the beggar to keep quiet. Keep quiet, keep quiet. But that only provoked him to seek the more for aid. Son of David, have mercy on me. And above the din and above the hubbub, Jesus heard that cry and he stopped completely. Mark says that he stood still, so that the blind man could locate him by the sound of his words. Call him here. And no one dared to say no. They wouldn't approach the blind, defiled, degraded man. They wouldn't even give him a name or a nickname. But someone called out to him and said, "Hey, take heart, get up, he's calling you." And although he could not see Jesus, he knew where Jesus was standing. And not only did he get up, we are told he leapt up. He sprang up. And is Mark quietly hinting here, although not specifically saying so, that this leap of faith was a miracle in itself? For it was the blind and the lame whom David had cursed. Now, we cannot say that Bartimaeus was lame as well as blind, but when Mark writes that he sprang up, might he not be telling us that he was, and that part of David's curse was already lifted? And there's something else here. Mark tells us that Bartimaeus threw off his cloak. And we must ask whether that was all that he was wearing. After all, he was a beggar. He had no money. All he had, perhaps, was this cloak. That was all he was wearing. Bartimaeus then chose to come to Jesus, hiding nothing, holding nothing back. Jesus could see Bartimaeus just as he was, in all of his defilements, in all of his degradation. And Jesus speaks. And he speaks in the form of a question. What do you want me to do for you? Now, we might think it was obvious. This was a blind man. It's obvious what the blind man must have wanted. But so far he had only asked for mercy. And Jesus had shown him that by stopping still and summoning him. But now Jesus is getting down to specifics. And how often we fail to be specific in what it is that we want God to do for us. We think he knows. But is there something we're holding on to? Is that cloak still there? Is that prop still there? Jesus sees a blind man. But sometimes those who are blind might only be looking for a handout. Take away their blindness, and what have they left by which to beg for alms? Take away our prop, and what are we left with? Did Bartimaeus really want that last crutch, his blindness, to be taken away? He made one leap of faith. Was he prepared to take a second? Dare he ask Jesus to take away that last prop? And as we ask that question about the blind beggar of Jericho, perhaps we should ask it of ourselves. Do we really surrender ourselves, our minds, our bodies, our very souls to Jesus? Or do we hold on to just that one little bit of ourselves, that one last crutch? Do we really come to Jesus just as I am, without one plea? But Bartimaeus knew what he most desired. He wanted to see, and not just to see, but to see again. My teacher, let me see again. He was not asking to receive sight, but to receive it again. This tells us that he had once been able to see, and now he wanted his blindness, perhaps his self-imposed blindness, to be lifted. He demanded that his former state of vision be restored, that he might recover from his defilement and his degradation and be restored to innocence. And Jesus grants his wish. Jesus answers his prayer. Jesus removes the curse of his ancestor David. Well, there's the story as Mark recounted it in the first century of the Christian era. It's a story of a curse removed and of innocence restored, and that is wonderful. It's also a proclamation to the people of Mark's generation and of all generations that have followed that Jesus is ready to stand so that we can come to him just as we are, and that he will restore us to a state of total innocence, no matter who we are, no matter what it might be that we have done that has led us to a state of defilement and degradation. And then what happens? Like the formerly blind and defiled and degraded beggar of Jericho, we can, as Mark puts it, follow him on the way, wherever that way might lead, even into the city of God. A couple of final thoughts. We do not really know the name of that beggar. Mark gives us a Hebrew name, and we've seen that it means son of utter defilement. Yet he also gives him a Greek name, son of Timaeus. And that Greek name is derived from the Greek word timi. And that word means esteem, honor, dignity. Might it not be that Mark is teaching us a lesson about how we should look at others and even look at our own selves? We might see only degradation and defilement, timia, in someone. But then we are looking at them through the eyes of those who have not been touched by Jesus. And when our eyes have been opened by Jesus, then perhaps we can see ourselves and others as timid, worthy of high esteem, worthy of honor, worthy of dignity. And this final thought, we have been accustomed to reading this story as one about recovering one's sight. One's sight. Now, sight is an English word derived from a Germanic root. But we have another English word that could just as easily have been used by the translators, a word derived from a Latin root. The word is vision. I've used it once already in the sermon. Let us, for a moment, use that word in this story. And then we would have an account of someone asking to have his vision restored. And we can understand that may well refer to physical vision. But are we really asking Jesus to be an optician? But we also understand that the word may be read with a more spiritual understanding. As we age, and who isn't aging, although some of you might not think you are just yet, but as we age, we often lose our spiritual vision. The vision we had when we first responded to the call of Jesus, perhaps when we were quite young. Now we feel that we've lost something. We've lost something important, something that we yearn to regain. Dare we cry out to Jesus, Jesus, Son of David, I need my vision back. We can. We can, and he will stop, and he will summon us, and he will summon us to an even greater vision than we had before, if we dare to take the risk and go to him just as we are. Just as we are, without one plea, without any cloak to hide our shame. He will enable us to see ourselves no longer as children of utter disgrace and degradation, but as children of honor and of dignity, worthy to be esteemed by him, worthy to be esteemed by each other. And there is another English word with that same TM combination of consonants as the Hebrew term timea and the Greek term timid. And it's timid. Timid. And we Anglicans and we Episcopalians are so often so timid. We don't march through the streets on Palm Sunday waving palms and shouting hallelujahs as the Roman Catholics do in Mexico and throughout Latin America. We don't often engage in big rallies in big halls. We're going to try it next February in Orlando. But we don't often do it. We would rather sit quietly, disappearing into the wall, so nobody can really see us. We're so timid. Please, 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 oh you child of timidity, don't let any timidity on your part get in the way of coming to Jesus just as you are. Come to Jesus. As son of Timaeus, daughter of Timaeus? Yes. But come to Jesus just as you are, and let him make you the daughter of Timei, the son of Timei. Come to Jesus and let the Son of David lead you up the hill from Jericho, where we are, to Jerusalem, to the very city of God, to the temple of God, even to the very throne of grace. Come to Jesus, just as you are, and you will become children of honor and dignity, worthy to be esteemed by him, by each other, and even by yourself, you little timid ones. Amen.
Amen.